Welcome to those who are just joining us now. We're about 5 minutes away from starting. We're excited to have you here. You'll hear me introduce the session today a couple times as we get started. This has been a work in progress for almost 3 years now. And we're super excited to be able to bring to you the Thought Leadership Series today through the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. My name is Jennifer Lynch, and as you all get settled, we'd really love it if you could open up that chat pod, take a moment to introduce yourselves, share a little bit about what you hope to get out of today's community reinvestment webinar, and we'll begin in just a couple minutes.
Jesus.
Welcome to Janice. Glad to see another Goodwill member with us here today. I'm from Goodwill Industries International, and for those of you who are just joining us, we are here just at the very beginning of the Thought Leadership Series, where we'll be focusing on community reinvestment today through the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. My name is Jennifer Lynch. It's about 1:27, so we're going to get started in about 3 minutes. As you get settled and as the session starts, we'd love it if you take some time to introduce yourself in the chat pod, acknowledge what organization you're representing or what region of the country you come from, and even if you could share a little bit about what you're hoping to get out of today's session, as we have the opportunity to bring together some great leaders in the second chance reentry arena from across the country today. Really a milestone for the NRWC today. Welcome to Kenya and Daniel. So excited to see you guys here today, and welcome to Don. For those of you just joining us, we're just taking some time before the session starts today, the Thought Leadership Series, to introduce ourselves in the chat pod and acknowledge what organization we're representing or what region of the country we come from, and sharing what we hope to get out of today's session. We'll be focusing on community reinvestment today through the Thought Leadership Series, but this is just the first of what we hope will be many sessions where we get to discuss second chance activities, how reentry plays a part of our community, and how we can work together to really create sustainable systems to create really great, safe, thoughtful, thriving communities. Welcome to Janet and Ray, and from Kyle. I'm really excited to see all these people here from Goodwill organizations. I am from Goodwill Industries International and just one member of the steering committee here at the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative, where we have representatives from 5 different organizations that focus on providing reentry services across the nation, and who specifically focus and specialize in the workforce arena. Grateful to have the opportunity to bring the Thought Leadership Series to you today. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Today, our focus is going to be on community reinvestment, and we would love it if you could just take some time to introduce yourself in the chat pod, share what organization or region in the country you come from today, so that we could get a clear representation of who's with us today and what you want to learn. This is going to be a dynamic session. We have some of the best leaders in second chance and reentry from across the nation with us today, and we can't wait to bring this material to you. And I'm seeing we have people here from Tampa and Arizona. Would love to see it if maybe we could get people from all 4 corners of the United States, people from Missouri and Kansas, Texas, Hawaii, really have a great representation across the nation here. It's just about 1:30 now, so we're going to go ahead and get started with introductions. So this will be your last reminder. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat pod and tell us what region or country you're representing here today. And we're going to go ahead and get started with today's Thought Leadership Series from the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative, focusing on community reinvestment. And it's my great honor to have the opportunity to introduce to you Jason White, who's the chairperson of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative, as well as the director of partnership strategy at the Latino Coalition, who is going to be our host today. So Jason, so excited to have you here. Look forward to learning alongside each and every one of you guys today, and we will be moving forward with our presentation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session of our Thought Leadership Series. My name is Jason White, and I'm the chairman of the NRWC. NRWC stands for the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. And we're really a community of practice that consists of reentry workforce providers that work together with the goal of really scaling our impact. Now, for those of you who are joining us today, we know that you're making a difference in your community, and we're excited that you are here with us. But that being said, if you are interested in having an even bigger impact, you have chosen the right place, because that is the motivation that actually drove us to start this initiative. Because you see, 2 years ago, a group of intermediary organizations that were funded by the US Department of Labor to provide reentry services got together to start this effort. And it really came out of our desire to do something significant. As we got deeper into the work that we were doing with these DOL resources, we recognized two significant things that led us to take action. The first thing that we recognized was that no organization on its own would be able to have the level of impact that we were hoping to have. And I mean, we were all doing good work in our community, but we really desired to do much more than what we were doing. And the second thing that we noticed was that we were uniquely positioned. We were close enough to the work to really understand the needs of the community. However, we were also positioned and connected to provide information and support to advocacy, organization, policymakers, and even the government, so that they're equipped to make the right decisions for our communities. Therefore, we decided to formalize our effort and start the NRWC. Now, currently, the NRWC is incubated at the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership. And the goal is that the NRWC would become its independent entity that would be fully dedicated to drive national collaboration around reentry workforce in the reentry workforce space. Now, I do want to thank Richard Ramos and the leadership team at the coalition for their commitment to continue to build on the support that was initially provided by OIC of America, but also the work of our National Steering Committee that consists of members from Goodwill Industries. You've just met Jennifer Lynch. She's one of one of the members. We have members from FHI 360, Strive International, and Center for Employment Opportunity. Now, this thought leadership series that we're launching today is our first effort to say to the wider reentry workforce community, let us get together on one platform to learn about some of the leading practices and find ways to collaborate to move the work forward. Now, in that spirit, our topic for today is community reinvestment. We will be learning from the success of an effort that took place in Colorado, where a group moved resources from public safety into community to advance the work and meet the needs of the community. To discuss this topic, I'm very excited to actually introduce three key players that are behind the scene who have recently become my friends. I will start with Christy Donner, Executive Director of the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition. Christy, would you join us? Richard Morales, Deputy Executive Director of the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership, and Hassan Latif, Executive Director of the Second Chance Center. Now today, we're going to start by first having a discussion among the panelists, and we will end our time with some Q&A where the audience will be able to ask questions. So as Jennifer said earlier, please do put your questions in the chat box, or you could use the Q&A. One thing to note, the Q&A, if you use a Q&A box, it is anonymous, so you can ask anonymous questions there. Okay, so thanks, Jennifer, for working behind the scene. We're really excited for your help to feed these questions to us. So Christy, Richard, and Hassan, 2 years ago, I visited Denver, and I was extremely impressed with the work that you have been doing in Colorado. And I'm so excited that we get a chance to share this with the wider community. So Christy, let me start with you. What is the story behind this effort that has beared so much success in Colorado? Could you tell us that story, please?
Sure. Thank you, Jason. And hello, everybody. It's an honor to be with you, even in this virtual COVID weird world. And I just wanted to start a little bit to let people know a little bit about CCJRC. And so our mission is really around reducing the overuse of the criminal justice system and advancing community health and safety. So it's not just what we need to kind of downsize or dismantle, but we also understand like there are real problems in the community, and we need to be building those alternatives, not just to the system, but or within the system, but to the system, right? And the criminal justice system. So we do a lot of policy advocacy, of course, but we are a little bit of a hybrid in that we are really our closest partners are with the community direct service world. And a lot of the folks that are associated with CCJRC have been directly impacted by the criminal justice system or crime or addiction or any of those things. So, you know, we've been around for almost 20 years, and, you know, we woke up, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, realizing, you know, we are spending $1 billion on corrections in Colorado, and nothing is better, right? Even from some of the successful advocacy work we have done, yeah, we can say we've downsized the prison system, we've closed prisons, yay, you know, but communities were still struggling with the same problems. And so we kind of challenged ourselves to ask one very simple question, which is, what does different look like? Right? Both for us, right, as an organization and our work in the world, but also what is our vision, right? What is our vision for what it would look like? So in shorthand, and of course, we've been blessed to be in partnership and in friendship with Richard and the crew from the Latino Coalition, and Hassan and many others in the direct service community out here, and sort of to co-imagine what different could look like. But one of the things that was key about it is that the community needed to be seen as part of the public health and safety continuum and funded as such, right? This idea that if you work for the government, you get a paycheck, and if you don't, then you do a burrito sale. Like, that's not going to work in order to build what we need to build in the community to really advance the health and safety. We knew we wanted the money to be driven very deeply into community, right? Not just rely on the pre-existing nonprofits, which may or may not serve their communities, may or may not be reflective of the communities that they're wanting to serve. So we didn't want to just be feeding sort of the nonprofit industrial complex kind of situation. And we wanted to make sure that people deep in the community had the power to build what they thought their community needed, right? That people closest to the problem are the people who also are closest to the solutions, and they needed to be empowered in order to be able to do that. So anyways, all of that, you know, and the thing that was really important, and this was great learning from the Latino Coalition in particular, because they really opened our eyes to a whole host of things. But a lot of times the people that are the best at serving their communities don't have all the nonprofit infrastructure around them to support them. So they're never eligible for anything, right? Because people, philanthropy or government grants, they won't take the risk on somebody. And that's where LC comes in, and they wrap around and they create a lot of that infrastructure support. And so we knew in order to drive the money deeply into the hands that most could use it the most effectively, we needed to have that role in the model, right? If we want to call it a model. So anyway, so so we had all that learning, right? And so in 2013, we had a tragedy, which is when our director of corrections was murdered by a man on parole. And the shock and awe and horror of that reverberated all over the state, and certainly within our hearts as well. And so, you know, one of the things that we wanted to do is part of, you know, the conversation in the state was fix parole. What's wrong with parole? Fix parole. And we kept saying the community is part of it. The community is a part of it. The community is part of the solution, right? Because everyone was saying, okay, how many more parole officers does DOC need to have? How many, you know, gadgets and whatever do they need? And all of this kind of stuff. And we were completely ignored in the whole process of that. And we thought, well, that's ridiculous. And so we worked on legislation that created the first grant program in the Department of Corrections to fund deep community-based reentry. And I will tell you, the DOC was not happy about that concept, because DOC often thinks we already do reentry, or we already partner with the community because they have a vendor in the mental health center. Like they weren't even seeing us in this arena. And so they were not particularly happy. But we won, so, you know, so sad, too bad. And it got enacted. And then in the legislation, though, we're really clear to spell out the role of the intermediary, that this was not going to be a grant program managed by the Department of Corrections, that they were going to have to, because they don't know how to do that. First of all, let's not ask people to do things they don't know what to do or how to do it. And so that was written into the legislation, that they needed to contract with a third-party administrator to manage the grant program. And we were pretty specific around the other wraparound support that role would be responsible for as well. And so, you know, we started really slow. It was $500,000 the first year, $1 million the next year. You know, CCJRC would keep going back to the legislature every couple of years and grabbing a little bit more money and putting it in that, and grabbing a little bit more money and putting it in that. Some of that's practical, right? Because it was just, we were, you know, chasing crumbs essentially, which is fine. I'll chase a crumb all day. But we also knew we needed to give the community time to get ready.
Yeah.
Right? You can do damage in a community by dumping too much money into it at all. So we wanted to pace in alignment with where the community was ready to expand and how to expand and all that stuff. And so in 2017, we had a sunset review, which in Colorado is a legislative process by which an independent agency does an evaluation of the grant program and then makes a recommendation to the General Assembly whether or not they should continue the program or not. And originally, I was really annoyed that DOC was requiring that in the enabling legislation, because I thought, of course, we get held to the highest standard, right? When was the last time we did a sunset review on parole? Or when was the last time we did a sunset review on probation? If the idea is let's only do what works, then let's just do what works and let's all go through. But it was great because Richard Morales told me, no, don't be afraid of this. This is exactly what we need, because we will shine. So don't be afraid of having a light, you know, on you when you look really good in that light. Now I'm middle-aged, so I have to be a little bit more careful of where that light is for me. So, but LC does not, and the partners with LC does not. And so we went through that process. It was a glowing recommendation to reauthorize, needless to say. I don't have the exact quote in my head, but something about how this approach, right, had a substantial probability of reducing recidivism. Every single member of the House Judiciary Committee sponsored the reauthorization legislation. We were able to add over $3 million more to the budget to enable us to expand it more. And I think what touched me, well, two things touched me is, one, when we were testifying in support of it, it was the head of the Department of Division of Adult Parole Richard, myself, and Hassan all together as a panel. And that spoke to the growth of that relationship. But what personally touched me more than anything else was when the DOC lobbyist came up to me right before the hearing, and she said, "I just want to thank you for giving us what we didn't know we needed."
Wow.
And
Wow.
so you can put that on my tombstone, right? You know, like, because that touched me so deeply, that they were so resistant, you guys, in the beginning, because they couldn't see the value. And this is where the Latino Coalition was particularly thoughtful and competent, is in building that relationship and not giving up on the fact that that takes work, right? We speak different languages, and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, since then, so right now the budget for wage use, so it went from 500,000, so it's over 7 million, just passed in our long bill last week. So that was really great. And just CCJRC has been really devoted to this concept of community reinvestment. And so we've worked on 3 other legislative campaigns. So in 2017, we worked on a crime prevention initiative called Transforming Safety that is being piloted in Aurora and North Aurora and Southeast Colorado Springs. There's actually legislation we're working on, like as we speak, that would expand that to include 2 rural communities, Grand Junction and Trinidad, to that. In 2018, passed another grant program in the health department to better serve underserved crime survivors. So including men, people of color, and young adults, chronically underserved victims. And then in 2019, a harm reduction program, a grant program, also in the health department, to really try to build a collaboration between local public health officials, law enforcement, and community direct service providers to really keep people out of the criminal justice system. So super excited. It's about $13 million a year in investment across those 4 initiatives, and $72 million to date. So we are, and we're not done. We've already got our next one in mind, but this has been just a phenomenal learning on how you can move community money into the community. But the role of the intermediary is essential to understanding. This is not just a grant program. You have to support the people getting the money so they can be successful.
Christy, thank you so much. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what happened in between those times? You talked about 500,000 and then 750,000. What happened in between those times when each time you go back to the table? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Some of it was so in the first enabling legislation that they funded for like the first 2 years, so that was already baked in. Okay. But in in talking with Richard Morales and Hassan and Servicios, and so we had a couple of community partners that were sort of the anchor. They were already doing the work and competently doing the work, and so we wanted to build the platform or the foundation on their broad shoulders because they already had the competency in it. But then started to say, okay, are we ready to grow? If we're ready to grow, then we'll go get some money, and so we were in constant communication with folks around the when and the how of that. And I think that's really important, that we don't we don't put people in a feast or famine either way in the budget advocacy work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christy. So it sounds like there's a very intentional and tactical approach that you took towards building first on the foundation that's already exists, but then bringing maybe additional community partners along. And I think that is where maybe the Latino Coalition comes in. But I would love to turn over to Hassan now, because from my understanding, Hassan, I've heard your story, and your organization is a living testimony of what it means to kind of start from the ground up through this process. Could you share a little bit with the audience what that experience was for you?
Oh, yes, I could. First of all, I'm really honored and pumped to be on this channel and have this kind of a forum. Yes, my name is Hassan Latif, and So, we're actually, I think, the poster child for the kind of work that the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership actually does. Richard will get to it later on when he speaks with us, but their find, fun, form, and feature mission is exactly what happened with Second Chance Center. Actually, for those who aren't aware, I founded Second Chance Center in 2012, about 6 years after returning home from 18 years of incarceration myself, and having navigated some of the challenges with the support of family and opportunities that most people wouldn't have had access to. But the first year or so was just a mobile unit in my car, and then I heard about this grant that was being presented to community, and it was a Department of Labor grant by the Latino Coalition. I'm like, who are these guys from California flying in? But actually, I went there and I met Richard Ramos, the CEO, and I met Richard Morales, and I pointed out the window to my car, and I told him, that's Second Chance Center. I need somebody to put me on. And I had written a book in 2012, Never Going Back, 7 Steps to Staying Out of Prison. I remember handing each of them a copy of the book and telling them if they wanted to know what my ideas were about reentry, that it was in that book. And actually what they did was, having just parked a car, it wasn't like I could write for a grant. Fortunately, my wife is the founder of It Takes a Village, a nonprofit in Aurora as well. She wrote for the grant and subcontracted Second Chance Center, and we've been on. When Christy mentioned about sometimes people not being prepared or ready for significant resources, we fell into that category as well. I mean, we had no infrastructure. With LC, they never were a monitor for us. We always saw them as mentors and guides. And so I remember doing an evaluation that Richard sent me after the first couple of weeks of parking the car. And I rated us very low in a lot of areas. I mean, we just parked the car, right? And hired the first 2 folks. And when he came in to go over with me, I was a little apologetic at having rated us so low. And he said, no, Hassan, sometimes people rate themselves very high in these areas. We're like, okay. He said, we definitely can help. And and that's what they did. So I, just to show how necessary it is. At that time, I mean, we started with a $3,000 budget. And this year our budget is about $3 million. So, to be able to manage and manage that kind of funds and those kind of funds and these kind of programming, you really do need an infrastructure, and you need to have that built in a very strong way, particularly if you're from a population like ours, formerly incarcerated individuals. We started out this work like all eyes were on us, like we were under the biggest microscope, and we didn't get to say my bad like many folks would. And here it is, we're 9 years and change out, and we still operate the same way. So the very first opportunity we got to put a couple of extra dollars together, we brought in an accounting firm to shepherd our resources. We brought in a payroll firm. We wanted to put these checkpoints in place for not just funders, but anyone who might have questions about what sort of stewardship we had over these resources. And I just want to just say something about the growth of Second Chance Center that I don't want people to misunderstand. I think one of the differences between our organization and many others is the whole provider recipient power dynamic is something that we reject at Second Center. We have chosen instead to partner with our folks. So when we say to them, the better you do, the better we're going to be able to do, it's not just smoke that we're blowing. And they see this. Every bit of growth that we've experienced has been a direct result of us being able to point to the successes of hundreds and thousands of people who chose us to allow into their lives during this transition stage. And, we want them to understand that. When it was just 4 agencies funded through that legislation that Christie, ingeniously structured, okay? Because she was playing it a little soft. The DOC felt like they had been ambushed and their budget had been hijacked, and it really had, okay? So it was pretty hostile at first. And to have the Latino Coalition in there putting out fires, translating language, because we didn't speak the same language. It was two different cultures, a bureaucratic culture and the community culture. And they were the bridge for us, the bridge of understanding and the bridge of communication. And during that process, we all learned how to communicate with each other. We all got a better understanding of how we needed to go about our business for whatever reasons. So, this is one of the things that we look at now with those 4 agencies. Now it's 20 agencies being funded through this wages program in all sections of Colorado. I mean, the most rural communities now have some access to services. And when our folks realized that they were a part in something like that happening, this is the empowerment thing. We don't believe empowerment comes with laying on some hands, like you empower. We're not looking for saviors to provide that kind of strengthening. But when folks are involved in something and they feel a part of something as opposed to apart from, that's an empowering thing. That fuels successful transition, and that strengthens people's resolve when it comes to the difficulties that they're absolutely going to face trying to get their lives back on track. So, we were blessed. We were blessed to be a part of this. I've been on CCGRC's board for going on 10 years now. So they've always tapped the community for input, not just some token check the box type input. It's never been about that. And Christy, she can say what she wants and try to hide out all she wants, but she's behind the curtain on some movements that have impacted the community in ways that people will never understand. And from her vantage point, there's no need for them to understand. But Christy, those of us who've been watching and assisting you and lining up shoulder to shoulder with you, we know. And the impact has been tremendous. And it's just been a learning experience for me, Jason, that I couldn't have gotten in the best universities in the country. So.
Wow. So Azan, you talked about starting out in your car, right? Just with a commitment, a hard commitment to the community and growing to a $3 million organization currently. Approximately how many persons does your organization serve in the community, and how has this support helped you to impact the community?
Oh, this great questions. COVID, of course, has knocked everyone off the top of their game. Prior to COVID, we were seeing about 60 folks a day at Second Chance Center. Typically we're engaged with about 1,350 new participants each year.
Yeah.
The thing about support, let me just tell you, where it was the Latino Coalition that actually gave us our first real full tank of fuel. After a few years, we were just trying to keep our heads down. We knew there were people who were sharpshooting, didn't want us doing this work, didn't feel that we were really qualified to be in this arena. And so we just try to keep our head down, stay in our lane, do some good work, try to build on our credibility. But at some point, we realized that if we were going to actually have a chance to do the level and the scale of work that was needed, we needed the community to back us and support us. And in order to do that, they had to know about us and know what we were doing. So we made a concerted effort to get out there and to speak to congregations and to speak at mosques and to speak at Rotary clubs and schools and wherever anyone was willing to give us a platform to speak with them. And what we tried to do was point out the commonalities, the common interests. And I'm going to tell you and everyone else that's on this call, I've not met one individual ever in the last 15 years of trying to do this work in community that didn't have someone in their family that was impacted by mental health issues, substance use disorder, trauma of some sort, or incarceration, or combinations of all four.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the common threads that we found in community. And it became our secondary responsibility, we thought, to make them aware of why this was important and why, we said that successful transition is a matter of community health. And that wasn't just a catchphrase. We really believe that. And we believe that we were a part of the improved public safety equation even long before Christie and the LC were banging people over the head with that concept. I've always said, Jason, that those of us that are in this work, if we do the work really well, it's not the kind of success that's ever going to be tracked in quarterly reports or data systems, because excuse the language, it'll be in horrible shit that never happens. That's the kind of stuff that we feel like God keeps track of. So we've always felt a part of that public safety equation, and to be acknowledged at that now is really the result of the efforts of all these folks and all these entities continuing to put in the work, being consistent about it, having integrity about the way we approach it. And, it's just been an additional opportunity, following an opportunity. And for the folks that we serve to see that and feel a part of that, I mean, for crying out loud, Second Chance Center built a 50-unit permanent supportive housing development that we opened last year in February.
Wow.
I mean, who would have thought a thing like that was possible, even a few years ago? And to have that kind of support in the banking industry and that kind of thing for this work, and this, it's just a testament to the model.
Great story, Hassan. Awesome work. Richard, could you talk a little bit about the role of the intermediary in community reinvestment?
Yeah, and thanks, Hassan, Christy. I mean, every time I hear you guys talk, it's such a reminder of how powerful community can be,
yes,
and shaping what different looks like. So just, again, that was just really, really there. With Latino Coalition, there's many different types of intermediaries across the country. And each one has elements of all of these things. So I don't want to lose sight of how replicable this is. Every community has this, and can certainly, do something like this. With Latino Coalition, our story really starts back in 2003, where our founder and executive director was at a conference and really talking and working with a lot of the communities that were there, which were predominantly people from communities of color, and really asking, hey, he's seeing everybody do all the work, but how many people were getting this type of funding from, the state or federal? And it was next to nothing. And so that was something he said, hey, this really has to change, because all of this work was happening within the communities. And oftentimes we'd see people parachuting in, and then once the service or the money dried up, they were gone, leaving the community no better in terms of its capacity or infrastructure than when they found it. And so really we take this approach of the find, fund, form, and feature. So it's a really easy way to articulate this. And when looking at find, that's really acknowledging and speaking to the fact that there are community and faith-based organizations in every community, working on these issues. Now, they may not look like, a normal nonprofit or government agencies. They don't have the buildings, the copiers, the conference rooms, but they do have that deep connection to community and trust of the community that they're serving, and also a deep understanding with lived experience of what people are going through. Because it's not a transaction where, oh, you're out, now get a job, you're done, you're good. That's not how this works. So finding is really speaking to just recognizing and bringing in these natural leaders within the communities. Now, the fund piece really speaks to that we get money to give money. One of the things that we've found is, all of these organizations are doing the work, but they don't have development departments. They don't have grant writers on staff. They don't have dollars to, ask for consultants to come in and write grants. And yet they were all doing the work, but locked out of all these funds that were supposed to be there to help do that very thing. And so really, that driving that money deep into community is first connecting with those communities, hearing what the need looks like, going out and getting the money, and then driving it really deeply to them. Now, one of the things is, has been said, we have to be careful how much, what that layers, what that looks like. Because some of these things that, if we go straight to the community and just give the money direct, what can happen is we take the best people right out of the field. because all of a sudden they've been working and serving people in their community, and now they're behind a desk trying to figure out this administrative report and this reporting requirements and these monitoring and all these financial. So it becomes really burdensome. And so through that kind of funding piece, we have to be careful of kind of how we do that. Now, the next one is form. And form is really, you know, people have told us year in and year again over, you know, lots and lots of organizations, hey, the money was great, but really the form, that capacity building and technical assistance that wrapped around our organization and let us define who we are and how we serve our community. Because this was never a thing of like, okay, now we're partners, you guys can't talk or do anything else, you can't talk or work or partner. It's the exact opposite. You know, how do we build you up as an organization to be able to really focus on who you're serving? And that may be an absence of our funding, you know, connecting them with different funders, different strategies. And Hassan is a great example. I mean, I can tell you, I would never thought he would have a 50 unit, you know, apartment building and serving the community the way he is doing. So it's amazing to see how once community has just a modicum of support and stability, how they're able to build around that in response to the cry in the community. So that's been really, really exciting to see. And within that form is even Latino Coalition continuing to, you know, really understand what is the need and how do we provide capacity building and growing with our community partners. You know, Hassan had once quipped, you know, yes, there's no fifth F, there is no finish. You know, so this continues to go on as they grow, we grow with them in response to how we can serve them. Now, feature, the final F, what that's really speaking to is so often our communities are talked about rather than being talked with. They're responding to, you know, a policy or something that's coming down rather than being part of crafting that policy and people getting to really understand what's happening in community. So really bringing community to the table in a meaningful and substantive way. That way they also have a voice and a hand in how these things that we're doing and crafting impact them and the people that they serve. You know, when I reflect back and looking at the importance of an intermediary, and again, there's many across the country, every community has this. You know, is that bridge? Because, you know, government and nonprofits do speak different languages. You know, for government, there's all this rules and bureaucracies and laws, and they're accountable for a lot of different things. And in that accountability, it's difficult to let go because no matter what happens, you're still accountable. And within community, you're still working through all of the things. How do you respond to community? And then try to navigate all of this government bureaucracy. It's like it becomes a whole nother job. So you just throw up your hands and say, forget it. It's easier not to have it. So becoming that bridge and building that bond between the two has been really, really important because there's time as an intermediary, you need to know when to come in and help and you need to know when to get out of the way. Because really you want that relationship to be residing between that entity and the community. And what we've also been able to do, I think, is avoid what we'd call success disasters. You know, you put a lot of money into community and you're expecting this outcome and they're imploding and you say, oh, see, we tried. It just doesn't work. And that's just not the case. So really looking at that has been really important. And then over time, it's important to start really working with these community partners to strengthen that organizational muscle of how to prepare for growth. Because growth is no joke. That's a whole nother additive of all of a sudden you're working and doing what you do day in out. You're asked to serve 100, then 250, and now you're bringing on staff and you're training staff and you're developing policies, and now all these weird HR things are starting to kick in, these new laws. So there's a lot surrounding this. And so it's been a real privilege to be part of this experience, and it has been experience. No one came with this idea and said, here it is, we've got it, now let's just run the play. Through this deep collaboration, and I'd even move it from collaboration to what we call co-elevation, which we describe as collaborating with a real genuine sense of well-being for one another. Because oftentimes collaboration these days, this feels really transactional. You do this and I do that. But when you get in this space of how do I really support you in a meaningful way, it's really important, you know. And in that collaboration, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't speak about the Colorado Department of Corrections and the Division of Adult Parole, because they've been absolutely amazing community partners in the community and really getting in and working with us. And that's been an iterative approach, but the leadership they've had, I think, is outstanding and really provides a model that if others are worrying like, hey, yeah, it sounds good, but then how does this really work? I would reach out to them and hear from that perspective. So all in all, you know, what I would like to just really underscore is that this can be done in every community. And if you're not sure exactly how to get the ball rolling, my advice is this: bring people together and simply ask that question: what does different look like? Thanks, Jason.
Thank you so much, Richard. I do have a follow-up question for you. So, you know, oftentimes intermediary are considered almost like a middleman, so to say, which have a negative connotation to it. And just by listening to what you shared and knowing about the work of the Latino Coalition, even 2 years ago when I visited Denver, I see that the partnership dynamic, you brought me to meet Hassan, I remember, and I saw the partnership dynamic between the intermediary, i.e. the funder, and the community provider, the service provider, right? But along with that, it sounds like there's a ton of learning that takes place in your engagement with the community partner based on the approach that's used by the Latino Coalition. Could you talk a little bit about some of those things that you've learned and how maybe you even bring that back to Christy and her team to equip her for engagement with at the legislative level?
Sure. Yeah, I'll tackle that in kind of two ways. You know, first, in meeting community where they're at. You know, when we look at community partners, first thing we have to recognize is that Denver isn't Sterling, isn't Cortez, isn't Grand Junction. So all that to say that, you know, you can't come in with a cookie cutter approach. So you really have to meet the community partners in the context of the community that they're serving. And as part of that process, we're doing assessments and working and finding out where are they at, and then bringing out where can we bring in that value. Because, you know, what you don't want to do is just end up taking their time because of it's a nice visit and it just is relational and there's really no growth there. And you don't want it coming in where it's really transactional and you're just saying, here's my checklist. Okay, I got what I needed as an intermediary to make sure I could report to the funding source and said, done. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work and a lot of coaching and a lot of training to come alongside the community partners and serve them in a way that's meaningful to them. You know, along the way, we're building in feedback loops. And this is kind of the second part to how we're working back with the Department of Corrections, we're working back with other stakeholders, legislators, CCJRC, and it's in the data that we're collecting. So really being able to understand the program, who we're serving, how we're serving, the success we're having, the challenges that we're having, and being able to convene around those things in a way that's very objective in a sense. That way we're not trying to cast blame. We're not trying to say, you're the problem or this is the problem. They're like, here's the problem. How can we all rally around this? And so in that process, it's been really great to work back with our stakeholders and share that information and convene community in the midst of all that. It's not an absence of them. They're part of these brainstorming sessions, these thought leadership sessions, and they're able to also give their perspective as we move along.
Awesome. Thank you. Christy, please go ahead. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Rich, so to give examples, like when the enabling legislation was passed, we weren't thinking from the lens of, okay, how does state procurement rules interface with the cash flow needs of the grantees? In case you were wondering, that was not something that was on our radar screen. But that's a real issue, because when we talk about this clash of cultures, the interface on how and in what ways money distributed is one of those things that we needed to be more mindful about. So our state only procurement only allowed for reimbursement, right? So there was no advance. And so we had some of the early community partners, into, my shock and horror, but speaking to their passion and commission, they were paying payroll on credit cards and then crossing their fingers that they would get paid in time, because the state takes it can take a little while to process payments. And so all of that stuff. So when Richard was really saying, okay, we got a real problem here as we're implementing it, and had raised these issues. So we went back to the next legislative session and cleaned that up. Right. And so because we want to make sure that the legislation is crafted in a way that is promoting the success of people in the community, right? And what they're trying to do, not a burden or a hurdle they have to, manage to the greatest extent we can, right? It's not perfect by any stretch. But so the next year we went in and so that the Department of Corrections had the authority to advance up to 20% of the total grant in advance. So that's to help with some of the cash flow issues, or we allowed in statute for funds to roll over, because state government has a use it or lose it kind of cycle, right? So any funds that aren't expended by the end of the fiscal year revert back to the state, and so that doesn't really work really well from a community interface. So we just went back and allowed for rollover authority. So any funds that were in that hadn't been expended just automatically roll. So it's like, it sounds Manini, and it kind of is, but it's the kind of attention you pay to what's working, what's not working. Okay, let's try to fix it. And so it's a constant, growth and development. And I also want to echo what Richard was saying about the partnership with the department. And it didn't start off in a good place at all. And it wasn't, I think, some of it was just, we were going through so much trauma over the loss of Director Clements and all of this stuff. It probably just felt like one more thing that they had to manage and do that was, and so, but amazing openness. Like I would sit down with them and say, look, in the early years, and say, look, we got to have a conversation about, you guys, are you comfortable with ex-cons working with folks on parole? We got, like, let's have this conversation, and just really open and flexible to the extent they could, or just have conversation. And I just want to also really acknowledge that that's a real partnership now. It's not just sort of like, oh, okay, we have to deal with you and you have to deal with us. It feels to me like a real partnership. And I give a lot of credit to everyone to make that happen, because we didn't start there. We didn't start at that place.
Wonderful, Christy. I have a follow-up for you, actually. So thank you for sharing that. You emphasize a point around partnership, right? And it's literally kind of the spirit of the NRWC. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, if you could elaborate more. And Richard and Hazan, feel free to jump in as well. But how important do you think collaboration is to this type of work?
You can't.
And
For me, you can't do without it.
Okay.
It is because people are complicated too. So we need to partner, because they can be, needing things that one organization can't provide, but another can. We're kind of building a network. So it's not just like, here are 20 individual discrete grantees who are serving their own subset of folks. I think what the Latino Coalition has done so well, and the folks that have been part of the grant program, is building that network of collaboration across the programs as well, which is different because, a lot of times in the nonprofit world, we're set up to sort of play the Hunger Games with each other, right? Like that how we do philanthropy and funding often creates more competition environment than collaborative environment. And so, we have to kind of break free of some of those ways of being as well in it. But I'll shut up now.
Awesome.
Hey, if I could just jump in really quickly, Jason, I don't see how this thing could have could have come about without real collaboration. Let me just there were things we didn't know how to do, quite frankly.
Mm. Yeah.
The core belief we had about transitioning successfully and what was be required is in a real simple formula: thoughts plus feelings equals behavior. So we knew the kind of things we needed to work on, but where it came to building an organization, to be honest, we had very little idea about how to do that appropriately or efficiently. Without the LC, we wouldn't have been able to do that. A lot of times, some of the work of CCGRC is actually fueled by the need that's uncovered from the community doing this work. They're not sitting in some think tank just thinking of ideas about what kind of legislation, so it's one hand washes the other, so that we all come out of this thing clean. And I don't see any other way that it could happen in other communities without that kind of partnership. I mean, we have these kind of peripheral benefits that nobody even thought of. Like right now, we have formerly incarcerated folks sitting on some pretty significant committees in the state and on task force, whether it's about police accountability or sitting on the governor's executive clemency board. These kinds of opportunities opened up as a result of this collaborative work and us getting an opportunity to show and prove the value of community investment, community reinvestment, and community partnerships. And so, I mean, those are the kind of things we never would have imagined having been possible. Like me having the AG's number on speed dial. I mean, come on, for real, that kind of thing still boggles my mind. So yes, I don't think it can be done without this kind of partnerships, brother.
Awesome, thank you, Richard.
Yeah, Jason, I'd really like to share that it takes time, and you have to develop that relationship, and it has to be demonstrated through your competency at doing the work and your character in the midst of tough decisions. So really coming together, because when you're doing that, there's always questions. Can I trust you? Am I losing power? Am I gaining power? Do I need to be worried about that? These are real subject questions. There's culture changes. I mean, organizational culture, like, well, this is our paradigm of what community safety looks like. And this is what, this paradigm, how do we reconcile these things? So you're talking about those things, and you don't start out just getting in a room and having that conversation necessarily, because again, it goes back to, you have to trust to be able to open up. So there's that iterative approach, but what we've also seen is kind of this freeing aspect of so many of organizations and government entities are asked to be everything to everyone. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing everything, you're not doing anything well. And so this ability to really start focusing and getting back in your lane and knowing, like, this is our lane, that's their lane, they've got it. It lets us kind of work a little bit differently and more effectively on behalf of the people that we're serving.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we have about 5 minutes to go before we start take questions from the audience. Christy, there's an important question that I have here for you. A lot of what we've discussed is engaging with the state, right? Where do you think philanthropy fits within this equation as far as community reinvestment is concerned?
It's a tough question on some levels, because philanthropy has been part of the problem, despite, I think, a lot of good intentions around it. And I think in my experience, right? So I've been in the nonprofit world for 25 years or so. We're not a direct service provider, so we're, watching some of the direct service funding a little bit from a little removed, a little afar, but we're based in a drop-in community center and have been for 15 years. So I've just watched them struggle, where they'll get a grant to do this, and then 2 years later, the foundation changes their mind and they go away. So they're constantly building and losing and building and losing and rebuilding and losing, right? Or having to, put a square peg in a round hole, because it's not exactly what the community needs, but it's close enough to apply for the grant. You know what I mean? So It's just, it's one of the things, and there's not enough to do, I think, the level of restructuring around how we think about public safety and the health in communities, particularly in communities of color that have been so devastated. There's not enough money in philanthropy to do that. Right. And I think that we in the nonprofit world, I mean, it's embarrassing on some level to say it took CCJRC over 20 years to realize they needed to be fighting for money. Really? We have what we fund, right? So if we want different, we need to fund different, but it didn't, dots didn't get connected for us organizationally until we had kind of gotten through some of this initial work with the Latino Coalition and the community on the Reentry grant program. And so I think we have to change our mindset too in the nonprofit world that we think this is just about going after the next grant. I mean, what community needs is much, much bigger than that. So I think we're all challenged to kind of figure out, okay, what is that vision? And then how do we build that for community to promote the health and safety? We think of these community reinvestment initiatives, I'll be really frank with you, it's about the Marshall Plan meets reparations. And we've been real clear and real overt about that. Yeah. And that's the level of investment where we need to be talking about. I mean, 13 million sounds like a lot. It is a lot, and it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, there's so much resource that's needed to really work and to address some of the challenges that community face. So thank you so much, Christy, for that part. We're going to turn our attention now to the audience. Jennifer, do you have any questions for us?
Several, to say the least, in both the chat pod and in the Q&A pod. So now's the time to put your question in if you want it answered by any of our panelists. I just want to start off with a comment from Alexandra. Community partners have the passion, the culture, and the philosophical perspective and approach that makes work truly impactful for people, families, and the larger community. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. And I think she echoes what many of our attendees are thinking and saying, and just wanted to start off on that foot by saying thank you to Christy, Richard, and Hassan for the roles that you're playing as we move this work forward. To get us started, we had a couple questions focused on bureaucracy. So we'll start there. Who provides advisory to the intermediary without adding layers of bureaucracy to the system? Richard, you talked a little bit about being an intermediary. Is there any insight that you could provide there?
Sure, and I think in this particular case, the way Christy had written the legislation, it wasn't really prescriptive. It just kind of described here's the functions, but didn't lay out here's how things had to be done. So that gave us a lot of opportunity to, work with Department of Corrections and finding that balance between not being overly burdensome, but how do we be both accountable and to the people that we were serving and to the taxpayer dollars, that showing that we were having good stewardship, meaning we could be trusted with the funds, and that we were showing some type of return on investment, meaning that they understood how the funds that were being used and they were being used for a good public benefit. So the bureaucracy that's built in is really around the programming and showing who are they serving and how well are they doing. And then the funding, how are they spending the money relative to the budgets and the services that they're providing in community. So outside of that, really everything is very much programmed focused. There's not a lot of heavy reporting. There's not a lot of paperwork. There's not a lot of crazy eligibility requirements or all this documentation that you need to get to prove eligibility. All of that stuff was really pared down. And coming from, we have many, many years, like many other intermediaries, of working with the Department of Labor, which we're grateful for the money, but the bureaucracy is pretty heavy. And what that looks like, this is nothing like that. So this gave us as a state the ability to craft what that could look like, was striking that balance.
Thank you so much, Richard. And keeping on the theme of intermediaries and accountability, would any of you guys like to share what are the lessons learned about being community-based, JDEI, and accountability to the intermediary. So I'm assuming that JDEI probably refers to Christie's role in some capacity. So that relationship and the accountability to each other, and especially the intermediary. Do you have any lessons learned that you'd like to share with the group?
I think what Jennifer is asking is, based on the collaborative effort where all three entities work together, what are some key takeaways that you'd like to share with the group? Am I correct, Jennifer?
That seems to be what the original post is asking.
Awesome.
Well, I don't know if I'm grasping the question fully, but let me just say, when it comes to our relationship with the Latino Coalition in particular, we've never felt as though they were someone that we had to watch out for, and we started out like thinking we had to watch our back at every step. We've never felt as though they were dictating to us. They've always been a supporting influence on our work. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think that's really critical. I like to say at Second Chance Center, we enjoy the illusion of autonomy, and the kind of relationship we built with the Latino Coalition has gotten us really accustomed to that. As a result, we don't allow anyone to dictate to us how we do our work. We've said no to grant opportunities and funding streams that came with the kind of ties and requirements that would have compromised the way we go about our business. And so I think that's been an important part of the relationship. And, you know, when it came to building that apartment building, since I'm turning back to that, you can imagine the kind of opposition that we faced. In fact, we were shot down 6-0 at the Planning and Zoning Commission for our project in June of 2018. And when that happened, it was like a kick in the stomach because we had already been working on this project for about 2 years. I picked up the phone and I called Christy. I said, Christy, you know, we need help. We need to rally the troops. And that's what happened. We had a network that was about advocates, that was about rolling out the groundwork and setting up phone banks and knocking on doors and that kind of thing, you know, to help us get this project across the finish line. When you have networks like that and partnerships like that you can call on when the times are the toughest, that to me, that speaks to the strength of the collaboration. So I don't know if I answered that question. If not, I hope it was informative.
Well, Hassan, you're getting some love here in the chat pod. From Howie, he says, your story keeps me going, my friend. So just sharing with you that you're the light that a lot of people need to see sometimes. And we're going to go ahead and transition to some questions from the chat pod. So for the panelists.
Hey Jen, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Can I answer the question on lessons learned? Just
Sure,
real
absolutely.
Quick? Because I want to put if any folks that are listening in are in kind of our role as the advocacy role, I think because we talk with a lot of our peers around the country, right, and who are like, wow, that's really cool, we want to do that. And my cautionary tale to folks that are in our seat is that this has to be community driven. If you don't have the relationships with the community, don't do this. You're not qualified to do it. Right? You may have the legislative skills, but you have no business if this isn't being led by the community and that you are then just taking the vision and trying to, you know, materialize it and bring it back down to community. And so that's one of the most important lessons that I share with my peers in it. And also that we all, I think, have found a way to stay in our lanes. We have very unique and distinct roles in this, and we've tried really hard to stay in those lanes, right? So that we're not stepping around each other. So like, for example, CCJRC has no role whatsoever in making funding decisions. We get none of the money. We go up to the Capitol, we fight for the money, we throw it at the Latino Coalition, and then we go have a margarita. Like, we're done. Right. And then they do the magic. Right. And so, and then they'll let us know if something doesn't work. So like, it's just important that you clarify what those lanes are and you stay in them.
And Christy, you set me up for the perfect segue. So thank you for interrupting. A question from Claudia, and this is for all of our panelists. How did you go about learning what the community needed?
Well, we asked. Because we were in relationship, right? We knew, we asked and reached out and just said, look, we have an idea around how to pull money from the state to support. What does that need to look like? What do you think? Is that a good idea? How do we do this? And will you read a draft of this bill before, so there was a lot of conversation in it's the co-elevate, like Richard was saying. So you have to have the relationships to begin with. Otherwise, it ends up a lot like what Richard was sharing about the transactional. Then you get on the phone and Hassan has to deal with this all the time, right? Being Hassan, he's like, how many people want a piece of Hassan in Colorado for some transactional kind of thing? I'm sure he has to manage that probably a lot more than he wishes he had to. So yeah, you have to have the relationships to begin with people who you think are competent. And then you see what happens.
Christy, could you elaborate a little bit? If you were to think about sustained learning, does the intermediary add some value there? I remember Richard talked earlier about a feedback loop that the intermediary creates between the community and government, state, and I'm sure your organization as well. Could you touch on that as well?
Yeah, and maybe Hassan wants to jump in and answer that one. That's probably a better question for him than me even.
Let me just tell you, we've been engaged with the LC for over 8 years now, and the role that they began playing as our mentors and our guides, it hasn't let up. I remember back many years ago, it seems, dealing with their financial person, and she asked me a question. Elizabeth, I love her to this day. She said, Hassan, how do you arrive at how you divide up certain funding streams? And I told her how I do it, and she said, okay, don't ever say that to anyone else. And she began a groundswell of education that actually culminated in, us going through a process of evaluation when it came to funding this $13 million project. I mean, they went through our finances. I equated to what a series of consecutive series of proctology exams would be like for their thoroughness, okay, and intrusiveness. And we were able to get through that process because of the education that we had gotten over the years from the LC on that level, so that our books, our finances, everything was there and it was tight enough to undergo this kind of scrutiny. And like I said, this is 8 years in and it hasn't let up. We're on one now. We're on an educational session with Richard Ramos about board relationships, which is something that nonprofits probably need some work on as well. So it hasn't stopped, Jason.
And oh, go ahead, Christy.
Oh no, I wanted to go back to Claudia's question too, because I was a little flipped. So yes, it is of course all of that, what I was saying in terms of you ask people in the beginning and stuff like that, but the community engagement is at all levels and it's ongoing, right? So even in multiple different ways. So even after the bill was passed, so when we did the Crime Survivor Grant Program in 2018, one of the things we knew was people needed clinical services, but most grant programs are only open to nonprofits. So in the statute, we said that it could also be open to clinicians. So we could develop new models of funding for recovery services for crime survivors. And so we had, and Wendy from the Latino Coalition helped facilitate this get ready meetings. So even after the bill passes, you can't just assume, oh, the money is there and people will know about it, because they don't. So we had an obligation to be out in the community and doing public education and get ready, give them plenty of time before that RFP drops, so that they need to be thinking about things, collaborations or not, whatever, that they have time to do that. And then the other thing is in the crime prevention initiative, the Transforming Safety Initiative in statute actually wrote in where local planning teams that were indigenous to those neighborhoods, right? Local electeds, could be law enforcement, could be community members, directly impacted folks, but they were from that target community, needed to determine what the crime prevention priorities were. And then that became the grant guidelines. So it worked from the bottom up, right? And so there's multiple ways, whether it's in the legislation and how you structure it, or the community outreach ahead of time, so you get the collective wisdom to know what the community needs so you can create the right thing. And then it's the ongoing, how do you get community ready for this opportunity and give them plenty of time, and then support them in the process. So the community centeredness of these initiatives is at every single stage of the development of this.
Thank you, Christy. And although we have several more questions to get to, I just want to recognize the time that we have remaining. And there's one last question that has been a theme across a couple different that have been submitted, and that's about sustainable funding. So this is a question to each of our presenters today. In your professional opinions, what are the best methods and practices for sustainably funding reentry services?
Well, I have a bias. And my perspective is, as long as we are spending state dollars on prisons, we'll be using state dollars to fund community reentry. So if we stop one, then we can stop the other. But until then, I do think that it's a function of our public safety strategy, and that we should be doing state resources. That's not to say it can't be the only source of funding. Obviously, for community, we have more flexibility, right? But that the lion's share of that should be funded through the state, or that's what I think, or through a jail. It could be at the local county level. So I just think the nonprofit world has to start insisting that we be supported in the way we need to do the work that's being asked of us. Instead of being willing to work for nothing or working for pennies. Those days have to be over.
If I could just speak to the sustainability thing, we've gone from myself in the car to now we have 36 employees on staff. Grants have come and gone, and gifts have come and gone. We've never had to lay anyone off. And part of that is because the core work, the base of the work, is supported through these initiatives like wages and the state funding things. As long as we're able to be out here in this arena putting in work, then we're going to be able to promote the need for supporting it. And we've expanded that to foundations and have a number of foundations that have come on board. And Public Welfare Foundation is one in particular that prior to the Second Chance Center, they didn't fund general operations for service providers. So I think that's a stream for corporations and foundations to kind of look at community efforts of this sort for investment of corporate dollars and foundation dollars, more so than they may have in the past.
Thank you, Hassan. Richard, do you have any final thoughts before we close out today?
Yes, and in addition to what Hassan and Christy, we're seeing at the state level, but we're also seeing this replicated at the local level. So counties and cities also have large budgets that can also include community and faith-based organizations as a part of that safety continuum and equitably fund them. So we're seeing this steady revenue source, the steady income coming from several different places, which is a healthy way to go about funding these programs.
Yes.
All right, to our panelists, thank you very much. I'm going to hand it back to Jason. And apologies for those questions that we did not get to, but that's just proof that there's need for more time for these thought leadership series as we continue. So thank you, Jason, and please go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you to our panelists, Christy, Richard, and Hassan, for joining us today. It is amazing the type of work that you're doing in the state of Colorado. I mean, this work is an example for many states to follow. My thought is, if I could put one word to what's happening there in Colorado, I would say it's transformative, right? And I'm very, very grateful to lock arms with you, so to say, and spend this time together. Before we go, I just have a few quick announcements. If you could hang in there with us, audience, I'd appreciate it. Just a few things. One, our next session, or next thought leadership session will be June 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the topic that we'll be covering is we'll be looking at a successful youth leadership council for reentry programming. I know many of us, if we have experience in this work, serving the youth ages 16 to about 24, there are certain nuances that come with serving that population. I must say I have witnessed this organization, FHI 360, National Institute for Work and Learning, and they have worked with this council to transform their program. So we're excited just to hear what they have to share with us and what we can learn from them. And so that's one announcement. Another thing is, before you go, there will be a survey that's going to pop up on your screen. If you could just take 2 minutes, it shouldn't take more than that, just to give us some feedback. We would love to hear some of the topics that you would like us to cover in future webinars. And if you have interest in getting connected with the NRWC, please do reach out to us. After we're done, a slide will pop up on your screen too. And my contact information is there. You can reach out to me directly. And we also will have the panelists' contact information if you want to reach out to them for any reason. And I do, again, want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thanks again to our panelists. Jennifer, thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. Emily Schreck is our coordinator. She's working behind the scene. You haven't seen her, but you have felt her. So thank you so much, guys, and you take care.
Stay safe, everyone.
Take care.